This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt podcast.
If you build, he will come. If you build it, he will come.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. I'm Alan Katz. Before we launch, if you enjoy this podcast, please do it the kindness of hitting whatever like button your podcast player has. It makes a huge difference to the algorithms that decide our fates here in podcasting. Even better and an even bigger kindness, but super appreciated, share this podcast with people you think would enjoy it. Tell them we exist and might just entertain and delight them the way, hopefully, we're entertaining and delighting you. If ever there was a metaphorical field of dreams, it's Hollywood. And in order to get anywhere near that field of dreams, you're going to need either an agent, a manager, or a producer at some point. Hey, what if you could get all three in one person? In this episode, I chat with Jeff Field, the man who manages my entertainment career. For real, he's been my manager for close to a decade now. As a matter of fact, when Jeff took me on, he took me on as a reclamation project. That's how deep in a hole I'd driven my career. But Jeff saw signs of life, and for that, I am eternally grateful. On a purely psychological level, it's important to feel connected in some way. Like the impossible, a comeback, for instance, isn't necessarily impossible. As you'll hear, manager describes only one of the three Hollywood jobs Jeff's held. Before he became a manager, mostly of writers, producers, and directors, he was a top-flight agent at the William Morris Agency, which eventually became William Morris Endeavor, WME. In addition to managing careers for clients, Jeff has also produced work for his clients. Producer is such a slippery title. In this context, what it means is that as a producer, Jeff was essential in putting his client's vision on the screen. Even under the best of circumstances, getting anything made in Hollywood is stunningly hard. Having a producer who understands how creatives think can make a huge difference as they, the producers, navigate the minefield of production. Again, the goal is to put a creative vision on screen or inside a podcast. It demands tact and diplomacy when necessary, but also a good sense of when to be aggressive and how to recognize that you hold all the good cards in a negotiation. Taste is important too, and emotional honesty. It's not an easy cocktail to make or maintain. That's why only a handful of people have successfully traveled from agency to management to producer of quality. Lots of former agents are now producers, lots and lots of managers too. I suspect it was that three-step filtration process that gave Jeff an extra layer of curing, let's call it. Plus, of course, his taste and honesty. If you like hearing how Hollywood deal-making sausage gets made at the grinder level, this episode is in your sweet spot. Jeff's a terrific storyteller, and wait till you hear what some of that sausage turned into. Ultimately, you've made an interesting journey from once you got here to agent to manager to producer.
Mm-hmm.
You've made this journey from one thing into another. That's ultimately the arc that I have in my head that I'm pursuing. Yeah. So that's the overall story arc in my head. But there are so many detours along the way that I want to explore.
That's for damn sure. Yeah.
You're from the East. You grew
I'm from
up
the
in the
Midwest.
East Coast.
I grew up in Indiana. So most people no one guesses that because I think I'm a New York Jew, right? So there we go. So I
had me fooled.
everyone I ask everyone, I say, okay, I'm going to have you guess where I'm from. No one ever guesses it. So
I would never, because I
yeah,
know that you went to Brandeis, so I thought, oh, okay,
yeah, yeah.
Northeast Jewish guy. I know the
I
top completely.
I
Holy
started
cow, you're
out my
Midwestern.
freshman year at Indiana University. My parents both taught at Purdue University, so I was an academic, brat. And then I ended up I had to get the hell out of Indiana, and so ended up in Boston.
Let's go back that step. Your parents were both academics at
Yep,
Indiana. At where?
At Purdue University.
At Purdue University. Okay, what did your mom teach?
My parents both majored in and got degrees and advanced degrees in English, American literature. And then my mom ended up teaching in the business school there and left. She taught writing and all that in the business school. And then she left there and went into county government, which in the Republican Indiana was always an interesting thing. And then my dad taught in the English department, and they wrote articles and books together and all that. They focused on my dad focused a lot on Thomas Wolfe and Southern American authors and also Jewish American authors. So Saul Bellow, Philip Roth, Bernard Malamud, they wrote a lot about all those guys. So, and it was ironic that my dad, perhaps his favorite author was Thomas Wolfe, who was a virulent anti-Semite. So there we go. So
Why? That's really interesting. What was it about Thomas Wolfe that so appealed to your dad? Do you have any
I
idea?
don't know. I've never been able to finish one of his books, so I can't tell you. But he loved his writing and all that, and it was just his thing. And actually, if him or his editor had actually written his last book, right, to try to really solve that controversy, and went through all the original paperwork and all that of Thomas Wolfe, so all the manuscripts, all the notes, and all that kind of stuff was pretty. I mean, fascinating for him, not so fascinating for me, but there we go.
Yeah, it's really interesting that all right, the Jewish intellectuals can appreciate the work of virulent anti-Semites. I'm somewhat of a T.S. Eliot fan.
Yeah, but and all these people, the people who like Wagner, and people who there's this
My
whole
dad,
this
my
whole
dad
thing,
loved Wagner.
but there's this whole thing in film and television, all that, and also which is, can you appreciate someone just for their art, even though they're despicable as a person? And we have this, and that's all that plays into the whole cancel culture that goes on right now today. Because if someone is just like a despicable human being, the Kanye West, can you appreciate his music if you're really into that kind of music, despite the fact that the guy's batshit crazy and anti-Semitic and racist, whatever it is, right? So to me, that's always an interesting thing. And can you separate those two things out? And I always thought it was really interesting for my dad, because he was very much, he was a Zionist, he was this and this, and that he could appreciate. And remember that Thomas Wolfe also, his mistress was Jewish, right? So this woman who was a casting director in New York was his paramour, right? And she was Jewish. So who the hell knows? And then he was cozying up to Hitler, right? So I don't know. It's just none of it makes any sense. So anyway.
And the world doesn't get any less strange day by day. Jeez.
It's very, very true. Very true.
So you grew up in this academic environment.
Yep.
As you grew up, what is it you thought you were going to do in this world?
I wish I'd had a very clear, concise idea about what I wanted to do, and sometimes I still wonder if I do. I have friends who knew they were going to be a doctor from an early age. One of my closest friends knew that he wanted to be a transportation engineer from the time he was 10, right? And he went and got a master's degree, and that's what he did.
A transportation engineer is what he wanted to be.
He was obsessed with transport. He was obsessed with trains and all this kind of stuff. And he's a brilliant guy, and he got his master's degree at Berkeley when I was in law school there. And and he's a good friend of mine to this day. And he knew what he wanted to do. Another friend, a close friend of mine, he knew he wanted to be a doctor, and his parents are both brilliant academics at Purdue, and he became a doctor, right? And so, I think some of it was influenced by my parents, and probably not the best way, but anyway, because I think I should have probably gone to business school rather than law school. I ended up hating law school. Started getting interested in the entertainment business. I thought it may be a combination of creative and business aspects of it. It also thought it would be not so lockstep as far as if I it was all based upon who your clients were and what projects you did. So it was much more reward based than being a lawyer. In retrospect, maybe I should have stayed being a lawyer. I don't know. But anyway, that's what I did. So I went to law school and did not like law school and realized that, oh my God, I don't think I want to be a lawyer. Right. So
why Brandeis?
That was just not my parents, even despite the fact they were academics, did absolutely in my school helped me zero about figuring out what school. So I should have, coming out of high school, all the stuff that they do now, counseling people, all this stuff. I had no counseling. I should have gone to an Ivy League school. I should have gone to all these schools I could have gone to. I had no clue. And I was incredibly naive and stupid about it. And if I had been smart about it, I would have made a much smarter choice of where I went to college, and I wouldn't have even gone to any university initially. And I just didn't have my act together. And my parents were a little of no help because they thought I should just go for the least expensive alternative, right? So there we go.
That is so ironic. It's like the fact that most psychiatrist kids are as fucked up beyond all help.
Totally. So I just, in retrospect, if I had really given it some thought and really, I have friends and I know people who are much more strategic about the way they made career decisions, all that. I unfortunately was not. So
okay. So showbiz kind of presented itself as okay, this is better than what I thought I was doing.
I thought it would be more creative. I thought it would be more interesting. I thought it would be fun. I thought I'd meet cute girls. I thought it'd be, I don't know. It was like, and I also thought it would be reward some of my, the fact that I had a law degree. I understood that. I was very good at negotiating. That's always been a strength of mine, being able to make deals on things, being able to be aggressive about things and all this stuff. So I felt like it would play into my strengths. And I was not going to be, in my mind, happy as a lawyer. So I didn't pass the bar when I first took it. So I retook the bar and I went into the mailroom at William Morris Agency. And it was just like, it was again, not terribly well thought out. In some ways it was, in some ways it wasn't. I ended up being, I figured out all these people in the entertainment business and just started calling people and contacting them. And it was really fascinating. I contacted Woody Allen's producers. I found this guy who had lectured at my entertainment law class at Berkeley, and he was John Schulman, who was the head of business affairs at Warner Brothers. I contacted him. This very famous entertainment lawyer, Eric Weissman, who became a friend of mine, I contacted him. And so I just started reaching out to all these people and just saying, what would you do? And so many of them basically said, go work at an agency. That's going to teach you about the business and all that kind of stuff. And I was interested in being an entertainment lawyer, but it was a catch-22 situation where no one, they all wanted you to have entertainment law experience, but there wasn't any way to get the experience. And the firms that I interviewed with were all like, they had stuck all these people in dead-end litigation jobs. They were working like 90 hours a week, hoping to get into the entertainment practice. And when I asked the question, they said, well, no one ever did it. No one ever made the transition. And so I just realized that, maybe this was a better way to go. And I don't know, I just ended up there.
The mailroom at William Morris is it's literally an institution.
Yes, they wrote a book about it, right? Called The Mailroom, I think, or something like that.
Yeah. It is like how the training begins.
They called it the Harvard Graduate School of Show Business.
Did you find it? All right. In retrospect, I guess at the time you might not have appreciated that that's what you were getting, but in retrospect, did you get a Harvard education?
I think it was definitely what you made of it, and I basically said, I am not going to waste any time. I am going to just be like as aggressive and sponge, and I would pigeonhole agents, get them to let me read scripts for them. I ended up like agents taking me out to lunch because I was just on it, man. I just was not going to take no for an answer on anything, I did not want to be a statistic of one of those people who didn't make it. That was not an option. So I I was really, really aggressive about everything. I would really was just like, I was not going to, it was going to take no prisoners. I was just going to, all these other people were like, thought, because there are a lot of people in the mailroom who parents were in the entertainment business. Their parents were wealthy. They, you know, they were having, they expected, they thought that the business owed them a living. And my attitude was, I have no connections. I don't know I don't have anyone who's going to give me a leg up. I've got to make it happen. And so I was just not gonna let any of the opportunities be wasted. And it was an incredibly frustrating and bureaucratic place. You had all these old guys running the company that were just awful people that didn't help you out, there's so many stories I have about that, but it was obvious that you just had to basically, through force of will, make stuff happen. But it was fascinating because at the time, everything came through the mailroom, so you read everything, right? And a lot of it, for instance, one of my jobs was they had these things they called the distribution. They had the minutes from all the staff meetings. So the minutes from all the staff meetings, you Xeroxed off on pink paper and distributed them on numbered them, distributed them on all the agents' desk, and every agent wanted them in a different place. Someone wanted the inbox, someone wanted to face down to their desk, someone wanted whatever, and you did it. But all the meetings were, you read all the minutes, right? So I knew all the stuff that was going on in all the staff meetings, and they had these distribution statements, which they stopped doing eventually because they realized that every project that William Morris had ever put together or had an interest in, you would see what the profit participation was. And you would literally see, it was like printing money, man. Like Steve McQueen movies and Marilyn Monroe projects and Elvis Presley projects and all this stuff. And they were like literally every quarter, like $4,000 from this project, $3,000 in this project, $7,000. And it was like hundreds of them, right? Thousands of them. And you just realize, like, oh my God, that's why all these guys are paying me crap and sitting there and driving their Jaguars and making, millions of dollars a year, because it's just for 100 years they had been generating this revenue. And also all the TV packages, because at the time William Morris was the only company that got 5 and 5% on the front and 5% on the back end. All the other agencies got 3 and 3. So they, the Cosby Show, Roseanne, all these shows, Danny Thomas's shows, all these shows, they had packaging fees coming in from them too.
And it's all passive. It's all just sits there. It just
massive.
They made a fire hose.
They made something like, I don't know, $150 million from the Cosby Show or something like that. The agency, they made, when we had half a package for Roseanne because we represented the showrunner, but Triad represented Roseanne. And then when they merged, then they had the whole package on that show. They had Cosby, but then they had A Different World, and they had this show and then this show. But there's so many things, and variety shows. And also remember that this was in the age of TV movies. And there was a guy named Arthur Axelman there, who's the king of TV movies. He had packaged over 100 TV movies, okay? So they got a packaging fee on every single TV movie. So yeah, the budget was, let's say, $2.5 million on the movie, but they're getting 5% of that budget, right? So they're getting $125,000 on this TV movie because, TV movies, who gives a shit? Well, if you think about like 30 TV movies a year, whatever it was that they were doing, it was incredible.
But they're getting they're getting that $1.25 just for having made the deal.
Well, it's more than that. They output it. I mean, packaging originally, and this is a whole other can of worms. Packaging originally was you really packaging, you're putting it together. You represent a showrunner, you're on a star, you're putting the whole project, you take it to a studio, all this. It became later on, it just became like, you just represented, you represented someone who meant to package, who was a big enough name that could drive the project. And so I think some of the projects were really packages that they really put together, and other times they were just like, they represented the right person. They represented someone who was a big enough star, a big enough showrunner, whatever. And, so the guy I was training under, he represented Hugh Wilson, and Hugh Wilson, meant to package in TV because of WKRP in Cincinnati and all these other shows. So that was a big thing. And so one thing I realized, when I was starting out, that I want to represent some of these people because it's a lot of money, right?
The representation business, the agency business,
Hmm.
as it figured out all kinds of different ways to monetize, to control the idea of packaging. Now that wasn't always the way. When William Morris founded the agency and was booking vaudeville acts, he wasn't doing packaging fees,
I
was
don't
he?
know. I mean, but I think they
When
even,
did that
I
happen?
don't know. I don't know for sure, but look, way back, there's one guy named Saul Leon that I was friendly. He was a crusty old guy, a curmudgeonly old guy, but he was the first TV agent who started in the radio department. They made the TV agent was in the radio department, right? So that's, but I think that they may have packaged radio shows. I don't know.
Huh.
I
So
mean,
it could be a rather old, but
I think it existed for a long time, and
huh.
the studios and networks were relying on the agencies to put stuff together and bring them to them. I think, and so and then look at, and their argument always with the talent was, look, then you don't have to pay commission, right? Because we're commissioning the show, right? And so then the
That's
talent
important. Now,
would say like, okay, well, I can save money. I don't have to pay commission then.
that is an important distinction as to why a production company would accept a package fee, because in essence they think there's someone is saving money in their minds.
Yeah, but I mean, there's someone did a whole article about it a while back, and just figuring out how that affected the back end and all this kind of stuff. And that's when the whole agency, the whole guild fight over packaging. The interesting thing was, in my mind, I think it was a very detrimental in some respects, because I'd run into situations where agencies literally wouldn't help you with a project because they didn't have a package. And so, but on the other hand, did it really affect PBS? So the whole argument was, well, it's going to affect the back end of all these showrunners and stars. But in reality, the only people really affected are the people of the Shonda Rhimes ilk, and those people who have massive gross back end deals. The showrunners who are not massive stars, not the David Kellys, not those kind of people. It's really not the Greg Berlantes. It's really not going to affect them to that great a deal. But anyway, that's a whole other story. So.
You eventually, how long were you at the William Morris agency?
I was there for about 10 years, I think. Yeah. I was an agent for like 9 or 10 years, and I was in the, mailroom assistant, dispatch, delivering packages, all that for like 2 years. So probably a total of like 12, I think.
You eventually would go on to become a manager.
Yes.
Now, the difference between an agent and what an agent does versus what a manager does, what in essence in the process does an agent do that a manager that sets them apart from a manager?
It used to be, I think, a much more distinctive delineation, and it's really not as much anymore. I think that managers are supposedly not supposed to procure employment, not supposed to be involved in the negotiation of deals, et cetera, et cetera. In reality, that's not the case. I'm not just telling clients what to wear to a meeting or something like that. I mean, so I think originally, look, when I started out at William Morris, I think there was one director on the entire roster who had a manager, one out of everyone that they represented. Now, I would venture to say, if you looked at most agencies' client lists, at least 75% of the directors have managers, I would say, at least, and probably the same thing with writers. And so it used to be the only people who really had managers were people in music and people who were actors, right? And so as the agencies started doing less and less of what procuring jobs, focusing much more on packages, much more on representing much larger entities, companies, I mean, much less just focused on talent representation. I think managers started, people, I mean, I always tell people that I don't have clients who just pay me, 10 or 15% because they like me and want me to help me pay my mortgage or help me put my kids through school, because they just feel like they need the extra assistance because they're not getting it necessarily from an agency. And then the agencies can do certain things that, someone who's, especially a small manager, a small, has a like a sole proprietorship or something like that, cannot do. There's a whole dispute. People say, well, then you have a big management company versus a big agency, and what's the difference and all this stuff. But I think a lot of it is just the personal attention. the focus much more on the long term, the focus on not just booking someone in a job, but is it the right job, putting them together with the right people, and also trying to put projects together, really, and just being a catalyst. I think part of what you do is try to manage the agency relationship as well. So you're trying to make some stuff start to happen. So then the agents get involved in more, and then they can, they have more clout, and they have more, and they have relationships that you may not have, and they can help push things forward. And I've been in situations where, I needed that senior agent to call, like, someone, a senior person in the network, and they were able to do it and make something happen that maybe they didn't even say anything different than what I was saying, but they just had the relationship where they had the clout to be able to make something happen that I couldn't make happen. But on the other hand, I did a lot of the work getting it to the point where then, needed that to be done. So it's it's a gray line. It's a very indistinct line between what we do. And the fact is, a lot of agents now do not get that involved in the negotiations. And often I am dealing with the negotiations with the lawyer much more than the agents are involved. Now, that may also have to do with my expertise in that I'm really good at that. And so, I mean, not to sound arrogant when I say that, but that's something that I'm good. That's something that I'm good at.
You've been doing it a long time.
Well, and also I'm very creative with deal making, and part of the thing, it's a very interesting challenge to me, how to get both sides to agree on something. And the goal is, which has happened to me on occasion, where you have both sides that basically say they got what they wanted and they thank you for making it happen. And you basically manipulated the situation so everyone ended up at the right place. And the fact is, I'd say 80% of the time when I'm making the deal, I know where we're going to end up. It's just everyone has to go back and forth and do all their, process to get to that point.
Could we say that the difference between an agent and a manager, an agent is kind of looking out for your next job and a manager is looking out for your career?
To a point, but I think that, it's not like the agents don't want you to have a good career. The agents also have a much bigger, they're dealing with a much larger scope of thing. They have many more clients. They have the whole agency that they're dealing with and all the politics of that and all that. So, that's maybe a little bit overly simplistic, way of looking at it. But I think that, the ideal situation is you have a team of an agent, manager, and lawyer that are working, lockstep, and we keep each other informed about what we're doing. When I need their help with something, I do that. When I don't, but they also have a great deal more information at their disposal than I do, because they have all these agents out talking to all the studios. When someone has a director fall out of a project, they're not going to call me necessarily unless there's a specific client that I represent. They'll call the UTA or CAA or WME and say, okay, or Gersh, we have this client, we need to have this opening in this project, and who do you have? And so that's something that they have much more access to than I do. And they also, they represent, the New York Times, they represent this, and that's something that I just don't, necessarily have as much access to. But there's also pros and cons to all of that. Sometimes their agenda may not always be best for the individual client, or maybe they're just don't have the time to do that. And I have maybe more time to hopefully manage a situation. And sometimes you have things that are blowing up and falling apart, and you have to spend the time and energy to try to get it back on track. And if it's maybe not the biggest client on their roster, the agent may not have the time to do it, but that's something that I can do. And I don't begrudge them that, but then, but just like anything, there's good agents and bad agents. There's good managers and bad managers. And so,
Indeed.
Some of them are really, really great at what they do, and I think are really, really valuable teammates, and other ones aren't.
Brian De Palma once explained to my friend Gil Adler, early in Gil's career, they did a movie called Home Movies together, and Gil was amazed by the fact that Brian had a manager, a lawyer, an agent, and Gil said, "God, why are you paying out to all these guys?" And Brian said, "You need all the help you can get."
Hmm? And it's like
that seems to be true.
25% of something is better than 15% of nothing, right? So if again, if it helps, great. Now I think unfortunately a lot of times I've been in situations where clients have felt the management was expendable and they didn't need me, and there's often cases where they were wrong, and but it's they'll have a. I've been in a situation where a spouse will basically tell their partner, like, why are you paying this extra 10% to this guy? You don't need him. You're like, so or you've done all the work to get them to this point, and then they say, well, I don't want to pay anymore, right? And so there's a lot of greed and ego and insecurity and all that wrapped up in it also too.
I know we're not really supposed to talk about Woody Allen anymore, but I keep thinking of Broadway Danny Rose sometimes.
Yeah, no, I mean, but there's all these things about agents and all that, and look, I went from one reviled career to another. I went from being a lawyer to an agent, to a manager. It's like I like murderer's row there. So
yeah, I guess Shakespeare said first kill all the lawyers. I guess he didn't have an agent, so he didn't know that was
exactly right.
Someone else to put on the firing line.
Yeah.
So all right. So 9 years of being an agent at William Morris, and you decide to leave. And
well, the decision wasn't exactly made for me. Basically what happened is I signed a new contract, and then they brought in new management. They brought in Jim Wyatt to run the agency, and he basically decided he was going to clean house, and I was one of those people that he had a very his line to me when he met with me was, which shows what a great manager he was, I don't know you, but I've got to let you go, which I have always remembered. And I said, like, okay, it's one thing if the guy said to me, look, I've done some research. I think you're a terrible agent. I don't think I'd want you here. Or I heard you're a real asshole and you're not the guy I want on my team here. But basically to say, I don't know you, but I've got to let you go. And you look at him and what do you say to that? Besides like, your reputation precedes you, and I wish you all the luck in the world, right? And so that's basically what happened. And William Morris, of course, tried to screw me on my money, and I was very lucky that my moot court partner in law school and one of my closest friends, who I also went to college with, is one of the top labor lawyers in the country. And so he agreed to take me on as a client, and he was not in the entertainment business, although he did represent the Writers Guild East. And he went to town, and there's some things that transpired that all of a sudden I got my money. So anyway,
what
to the end it was a kind of a crappy company, and it was really, the management was really awful. There was a guy I used to work with who had started out in business affairs there and then became an agent. And he basically told me about their attitudes toward the agents, and the people who ran the company, their attitudes toward the agents they were like a necessary evil to their business. And they basically just lined their pockets with what we did. And they were terrible people, and so, to me, it was no surprise that they would do something like this. And there's a lot of people there that were really despicable. So
how did you feel about the takeover when that happened by Endeavor?
I mean, at the time, William Morris was like, as I said to someone, what was happening is all these agents started leaving and go to ICM. So Ed L'Amato, who is one of the great agents who represented all these amazing people at the height of their career, Mel Gibson, Denzel Washington, Richard Gere, blah, 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 on and on and on. Michelle Pfeiffer, all these people. And he left to go to ICM. And then one after the other, these agents started leaving. Tony Howard, who was one of my mentors, left. She was one of the great talent agents, still is, and was ICM, and now obviously CAA. And Elaine Goldsmith left, who represented Julia Roberts, who was the biggest star in the world at the time, or one of the biggest stars in the world. And all these agents started leaving. Reese Shapiro, who also represented her, and all these people. And so they were like bleeding. It was like, and I told someone, I had just been made an agent like a year before, and I said I felt like I signed on as a deckhand on the Titanic. Right. It was every time I would come into work, every day, there'd be a new office with the door closed and the nameplate gone. And you say, oh shit, who left? And because I was low man on the totem pole, I was the most junior agent there. I didn't know what was going on, right? It was just like, oh shit, like what's happening now? Like and then you get rumors because people were poaching all our clients because they basically were telling everyone William Morris is closing its motion picture department. They're out of the business. And so people would like call you up and say, are you closing the motion picture department? I said, no, we're not closing. But you can't convince it. You couldn't sign anyone because no one wanted to be represented by you. They would all be signed. They were all signing with, CAA, or they were signing with ICM, or they were signing, we want a aggressive young agency, we'll sign with UTA, right? So no one was signing with William Morris. We couldn't sign anyone. We couldn't hold our clients. We kept losing people. And so it was a really brutal time. And so they felt like they had to do something, to stem the flow. And one thing that they had done was they started trying to put all the agents under contract because they wanted to lock them in so they couldn't just leave. But then they said, okay, we're going to solve the problem. And we're going to bring in Jim Wyatt, and he's going to, turn things around. And they had also tried to bring in Sue Mengers, right? And that had not been, that was a whole other thing. So it was a clown car. I mean, the way they ran the company was a clown car. Whether I deserved to be let go or not, that's immaterial. It's the way they did it was just kind of, messed up, but whatever. I got compensation, and then I just decided, do I want to go work at another agency or not? And I was just so burned out by the experience. I just said, well, maybe I'll just try doing something my own, and see what I can do. And of course, there are clients I thought they were going to come with me that didn't. And so I was like, oh shit, what did I do? Right. And so I don't know, it ended up meeting with all the agencies. That was a whole interesting thing and all that stuff. So it was an interesting time.
It's a fascinating experience to learn who your real friends are in this town and who they are not.
You really learn a lot. And that's one thing that stayed with me, a lesson that I've learned, is that often when the bad things happen to people, whether it's being divorced or a death or losing a job or whatever, that often people think it's somehow contagious and they just stay away from you. And there's other people that are really great. And there are people that were so great to me and people that were so shitty to me. But like, for instance, I used to cover Paramount Pictures as an agent. And so I used to, when Sherry Lansing was a producer there before she became the chairman of the company and all that, I would go in to see her every week. And she was like really nice, super smart, great taste. And when I got fired by Jim Wyatt, okay, and remember, her husband was represented by Jim Wyatt.
Billy Friedkin.
Yes. She calls me from her plane, right, and says, look, she says, I think you're great. I don't know what Jim's doing, okay? He represents my husband, but I don't know what he's doing. He said, but anything you need me to help you with, I'll help you. And, that's a nice thing to happen when you basically feel like you've been kicked to the curb, right? And there were other people. There was a woman who I had helped her get 3 jobs, okay, as an executive. Never called me, never heard from her since, ever, okay, ever. Her husband is the head of production at the studio, never called me, right? And it was just like, there were clients who basically I talked to every day who was like, okay, he's toast, It's like, I always used to joke about it, but it's true. I felt like I could cross the street in El Camino, which is where William Morris was, get hit by a bus. And there were some clients that would just say like, oh my God, who's going to represent me? That's what their response would be, right? It's like, so you definitely learn there are people who are like unbelievably, and they're often not the people you necessarily think. They're people who are unbelievably helpful and great. And there are other people who literally just ice and win and you're never going to hear from them again. The great measure of it was, go out to lunch with them, right? But after this happened, right? And you're trying to figure out what's going to happen. Am I going to do that? Am I going to take them somewhere else with me and all that? And if they paid for the lunch, that meant they weren't going to go with you because they felt guilty. So as soon as like you're having lunch with them and they say, let me get this, I said, okay, fuck, it's over. I'm not going to represent them anymore. It was like invariably that was the demarcation line right there. Like if they offer to pay, it's over. Okay.
If only you'd have known.
Like, there was someone that I had literally shopped their script to 40 different places, gotten it bought, got made, and literally takes me out to lunch, pays for it, says, "Oh, I'm not going to." Okay, fine, great. So anyway.
This business does attract an unusual kind of a cat, shall we say?
Yeah. I would say. I mean, other businesses too. It's not. I mean, my parents were academics, and there's as much backstabbing and all that in academia as there is in the entertainment business. It's just the entertainment is higher profile and sexier people doing it to you,
But so much more money here.
Yeah, it's totally true. And I mean, and some of it was my own fault, because I was struggling, and I was like, you get insecure, and you've been, fired, and what are you going to do, and all this stuff. So there's things that I should have done differently. In retrospect, I know 100% I should have done differently, and I would have handled certain things differently had I had my wits about me more at the time. But it is what it is.
If only we got to live our lives in retrospect instead. Wouldn't that be easy?
There's one of the best commencement addresses ever was Steve Jobs' commencement address at Stanford, and he has this great. He said, "I'm going to tell you 3 stories," and one of the stories, the parable that he's trying to tell is he said the conclusion is you can only connect the dots looking backwards. You cannot connect them going forwards, and I think it's. I realized as I got older and realized that I realized I kept knowing that I could connect the dots looking forward, and I really couldn't. And so you realize certain things happen, and you look back on it and you say, okay, now I understand how that all fits together. But at the time, you have no clue. And I think it's a very smart way of looking at things. And you see it in politics, you see it in business, you see it in the entertainment business, you see it with your children, you see it with everything. And so I think it's a really smart way of looking at things. And so at the time, I mean, I did not have any clue how the dots were connecting. And in retrospect, I was like doing Etch a Sketch, and it was going all over the place. But anyway,
but it ultimately took you into managing.
Yes.
You found that more satisfying.
In some ways, it's much more satisfying. In some ways, it's not satisfying. I mean, in reality, you had no job security really as an agent anyway. So that was all ephemeral. And it was nice knowing when you did something that you got the rewards for it, and also if something screwed up, you could take the blame for it. It was disappointing that many clients sometimes thought you were expendable, right? You could not. You knew that they were making a mistake. You knew this happened as an agent too. You see, someone's like saying you are screwing up your career by doing this, because you're not going to find someone who's going to be as passionate and work as hard and all that. And they do it. And then, I've had clients who come back to me, like former clients 3, 4, 5 years later, and say, made a mistake. And I said, okay, well, your career was up here. Now it's down here. Why would I do this again when you were incredibly disloyal to me, right? So it's a very interesting situation. But as a manager, it's tricky. I mean, it's both good and bad. It's much more creative. You can spend more. I mean, as an agent, I was like fielding. I had 5 phone lines in my office. I was fielding like 200 calls a day. It was like, had 2 calls lined up when they're holding, while you get off one, go to another, go another. It was frenetic, right? The pace is a little bit more manageable, and you can do things in a little bit more thoughtful way, as opposed to much more of what you're doing as an agent was just like, it was like a shotgun approach a little bit more, and everything else. And I think being an agent is different now than it was when I was an agent. But at the time, it was having a life outside of doing this. I mean, I had breakfast, lunches, dinners, screenings, going to all these film festivals. I was a whirling dervish. And the good thing is I have a lot of energy. So that was great. I mean, I was the guy. I mean, when I first started as an agent, I was covering 5 studios. I literally was working 90, 100 hours, like the, investment banking analysts work now. That's what I was doing. I was working, get in at, 8:30 working. I would go to dinner. I'd come back to the office after dinner, right? It was just like insane, right? And so it's
were you enjoying this at all?
I think I was. I mean, I think I was. I mean, it was kind of heady thing that all these people like want your help. They all like think that you're the key. These people literally think the only thing preventing them from being the success that they want to be is not having the right representative. And they've heard about you, and you've done this for this person, and you've done this, and people like wanting to be part of your orbit and all this kind of stuff. So it is, but on the other hand, it's super cutthroat competitive, right? People are always trying to steal your clients. People are always trying to like, and you're the pressure on you to try to take other people's clients and all this stuff. And it gets a little bit numbing at times, I think. And I think in retrospect, maybe it played off some of my worst character traits and instincts and all that stuff. So, it's probably good that I didn't keep doing it, but maybe, if I kept doing it, I'd be retired by now. Who knows? So
All right. Is producing more satisfying than managing or agenting?
Not now. It's very frustrating. I think it's a very frustrating experience now. I think that I look back at, there's a legendary old agent who was a real curmudgeon, right? But his name was Lenny Hershan at William Morris. And Lenny represented all these people. He represented Walter Matthau. He represented all these people. I mean, he 20 Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. He represented both of them. He legendarily he saved 20th Century Fox. He said because he delivered the French Connection to them when they were literally the studio was about to go under, when they weren't all owned by conglomerates. Basically, their whole business was, what movie are they going to, they wouldn't even have a TV division, I don't think, at the time. So he delivered, it was and they would, they would party, they would have fun, they do this, and it was just a whole different business. So I think it would have been much more fun to have been an agent like 20 years before I was an agent, right? And I think the same thing with being a producer. I think it's so hard to get projects made right now, and it's so hard to get. You feel like you're constantly like Sisyphus pushing the boulder up a hill, and there's so many things that can go wrong, and there's so many, and there's it's just like, I think in society in general, the top few percent get all the riches, and everyone else is scrambling for scraps. And so yes, am I getting stuff made? Yes. Am I having some fun with it when it gets happened? Yes. But is it's brutal. It's really hard.
Why really the business has gotten, it seems, harder and harder and harder, and it wasn't that easy to begin with.
Correct.
And getting onto the mountain is hard enough. Never mind that, man. The real problem is staying on the damn mountain, and that seems to be the hardest part of the challenge. Yeah, staying in the game.
And I mean, look, I have a lot of institutional knowledge. I have a lot of I understand how a lot of these deals work. I understand how to do stuff, and it's fun when I'm also working with younger people because it keeps me young, and I learn stuff, and I like being involved with clients I'm always learning things from, and I may be doing something really innovative or fun or different, or a book that I find that I get excited about. So there's definitely that. And I'm hoping that, we've gone through a really tough time over several years in this business between COVID, the strikes, and, now with the fires and the economic downturn and the overinvestment in streaming and the mismanagement of all the studio, all this stuff that's happened. So I think that, consolidation, everything else. So, I'm hoping it's not going to be easy, but I'm hoping maybe it'll be a little bit easier. And I think, but we'll see, but yes, it's hard because as soon as you succeed, people want to knock you off, right? And look, and like I said, there's things that I've done that were really smart in my career, things I've done that not so smart, and so you're trying to make it happen, but it's not easy to make it happen. And then when you're making it happen, then they cut budgets and do this and that, and so, but a lot of it is interpersonal skills. A lot of it is figuring out how to manage people, and I think I was not very good at that early in my career. I was more of a hothead and the angry young man, and I've learned how to be much more diplomatic and also try to steer things a little bit better. And so part of it is my own growth.
There's nothing wrong with growing up at the end of the day.
Yeah. So there we go. So
you've, as a producer, you've had to fight the good fight for some really fascinating projects. The one that you got your name on is Green Border, which it's a tough piece of work, but what an amazing piece of storytelling by your client Agnieszka Holland. Am I pronouncing her name correctly?
Agnieszka, yeah, it's hard.
And Agnieszka, I know she's Dutch.
People come close, but anyway. I forget about spelling it because no one can spell it anyway.
Oh my God, there are too many letters. What the fuck?
Yeah. So anyway, as she tells me, Polish is one of the hardest languages. She speaks 6 or 7 languages, and she said Polish is one of the hardest languages in the world to learn. So anyway, I've represented Agnieszka for a long, long time. She's also a good friend, and lately I've gotten involved as a producer on several of her projects and executive producer, and really much more about trying to help put them together, sell them, et cetera, et cetera. And this is a movie that I'm very proud of that I was associated with. I can't claim credit for, the inception. She told me what she was going to do, 3-4 years ago with this movie. And I was like, wow, this is just amazing. And, how are we going to get this financed? And then, they had to do it surreptitiously because the Polish government would do. So they had to pretend they were doing a TV series. They had to do all these things. And they had financing fall apart. We were going to shoot it originally in the fall a couple of years ago. The money didn't come together. So then they postponed it to the spring. And then shortly before the movie was supposed to start, they lost a significant chunk of their financing, like 20-25%. And I helped bring in a financier who's a great guy. And he put up that money for the movie and helped get the movie made, so the movie would not, let me put it, the movie would probably not have gotten made without him, or it certainly would have been made in a much different fashion because it was made dirt cheap anyway. And so he helped get it done, So named Fred Bernstein, he's a great guy. He's run studios, business affairs. He knows so much about it. He's forgotten more about the business than I probably know, and he's also just a really good guy, and he's very loyal, and he supported her in this movie, and it really made a difference. And that's one reason why I'm an executive producer on the movie. But I've represented Agnieszka since I was a young pup, and she's just, she's one of the most brilliant people I know, and she also makes incredible projects, and I'm happy to be associated with her.
The story is about people who are trapped on the border between two countries. It's a absolutely real situation.
It's all based on real circumstances of the people trapped in the border between Belarus, political pawns, refugees that are coming from places like Syria, et cetera, and are basically lured to the EU by the leader of Belarus and false promises, and they pay a lot of money to get there, and then they are pushed back and forth across the border because the Polish authorities don't want them there, the Belarusians don't want them there, and they're trapped in this no man's land of these awful forests, and I mean not awful, but forests, dense forests with inclement weather, et cetera, and a lot of people have died, and it was a terrible situation. And at the time, you had an extreme right-wing government in Poland that basically didn't want to have anything to do with these people. And you had the leader of Belarus, who was a pawn of Putin's, who was trying to, use them to get revenue. And so she was determined. She's a real humanitarian. Why she's done these movies about the Holocaust, et cetera. She likes doing movies that have something to say, and often people who are overcoming extraordinary circumstances, ordinary people who are coming over. And so you look at a lot of her films. So you have the border guard in this movie, et cetera, and the people who are thrust in these circumstances. And so she was determined to make this movie. And then while they were basically making it, then the whole situation happened with Ukraine and Russia, which was also cast a whole other light on this whole issue, because here you had refugees who were people of color versus people who were white Europeans, and so how they were treated differently by Poland, et cetera. And interesting enough, I am convinced that her movie had a big effect on the election because the government was defeated. Her movie was released 3 weeks before the election, and the government denounced the movie without even having seen it, said that she was a Nazi sympathizer. I mean, stuff that makes no sense, right?
Gosh.
And she was, we had to hire 24-hour armed guards for her in Poland. And then when she was in New York for the New York Film Festival, and she had death threats. And, but the fact is, the movie got made. I think it had a huge influence on what happened there. And, and she was vilified for it and denounced for it, but she's very courageous, and she got the movie made, and through force of will and other producers that worked on it and everything else, and great actors, and it's a great cast, and so it was a real important. I think it's a really important movie, and I wish it had gotten a little bit more recognition here. I think unfortunately the studio that released it didn't promote it the way I would have hoped, but anyway, I still get notes from people who see it and they send me a note saying, "Oh my God, this is amazing!" Will you tell her I saw this movie? It was fantastic, and so I think it's really great. And the Directors Guild came out with a statement in support of her when she was basically being censored by the government and everything like that, and I think that was really great. And so it's been but the reviews, I mean, it's like, I don't know if I've ever been involved in a project that has gotten those kind of reviews. I mean, it literally had somewhere between 100 and 150 positive reviews. It's made all these top 10 lists. It's like it's incredible when you get a movie that gets that kind of response, and it's totally justified because it's a really terrific piece.
It's very, very compelling. It's stuck in my head, but then again, her earlier Europa, I can't get out of my head either.
Yeah.
So, but we could go on and on, Jeff, as we probably will. We've been talking for 50 minutes, and we've scratched the surface and all the stuff I wanted to talk to you about. You're just going to have to come back, man.
I will. Well, you told me you wanted me to tell some stories, so I have saved the stories to tell you that will give you a whole other side of the business that will, it's like truth is stranger than fiction, so.
But I want you to appreciate that really, you brought such an incredible depth of, wow, just hardcore knowledge. If part of what I want, what I aspire for this podcast to do is to mentor a little bit. Mm-hmm. How does one get into this business? And so we talk about the nuts and bolts of the nuts and bolts, and really making it is one thing, but selling it and getting it made and getting it sold. These are, if you can't do those, go home.
You're trying to convince people. The part of what you're trying to do is convince people of why they should do something. And, I have this theory, I call it the emperor has no clothes syndrome, that you see in Hollywood all the time, that projects get made and you say, like, how the hell did this project get made? And it's like, when you think, like, it's the emperor has no clothes. Everyone's afraid to say this doesn't make any sense. This sucks. And we should make it because this person's involved, this person's involved. And someone's afraid to say, like, no, we shouldn't make it. It's a waste of money. It doesn't make any sense. And then you have and people, it's the old thing where people say, oh, we want something different. And then you give them something, they say, well, that's too different. And so, I represent some kind of quirky people and all that stuff. And you bring them something and they say, no, that's too different. We can't do that. I said, well, you said you wanted something different. Well, it's too different. And so it's like, you have all these stories about people, and you said something, and then these responses that you get from people are just like, oh my God, right? And you're trying to overcome it, but there's only so much you can do, right?
It's amazing our heads don't explode on a regular basis. There's just exploded heads all over the business.
And I was thinking about doing a book based upon all the things that I and other people have been told when you submit a project or when you go into a meeting and all that. And it's just like, it's like the best, because these things that I was told, I'll tell you one, and then I know you've got to go. Okay. So I remember I was trying to, someone was trying to tell me I think they were submitting a script for a client. It was an action movie. And they said, it's like Die Hard in a building. And I said, wasn't Die Hard in a building?
In a building?
And it's like,
they don't understand the put together game. They don't understand it. They should stop.
And Agnieszka Holland had this she was doing this project, Washington Square, and I represented the writer, and based on Henry James' book. And so the writer who I was representing, I was sent the script to someone at, I think it was HBO, for another project. And they said, but this is a period piece. Don't you have anything that's period? And I said, do you know when Washington Square took place? Like, do you have any, and it's like, realize that they had no clue. They had never read it. They didn't know anything about it. And it was just like, okay, what are you going to say? So.
And on that bombshell, I thank you, Jeff. And I thank you, everyone, for tuning in. As usual, we will see you next time. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, by Gil Adler, and by Jason Stein. Our artwork was done by the amazing Jody Webster, and Jason Jody, along with Mando, are all the hosts of the fun and informative Dads from the Crypt podcast. Follow them for what my old pal the Crypt Keeper would have called terrific